part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Iguodala to Curry, back to Iguodala, up for the layup. Oh, blocked by James. It's over. It's over. Cleveland is a city of champions once again. The Cavaliers are NBA champions.
Hey, what's good out there? Welcome to Cavs on the Break, an NBA podcast. I'm John Sabol alongside Hoops Wires, Sam Amico. Sam, it's good to see you again on this Zoom video call right here because we just saw each other in person a couple hours ago.
We saw each other, recorded a podcast, ate, got some free T-shirts and pens from Whitey's, and now we're back. We didn't think we'd be here.
We did not. And we're going to get to that podcast we recorded at Whitey's restaurant in Richfield, Ohio here shortly. But the reason we have to do this emergency pod before we get into our really juicy pod, this is maybe even juicier like a Whitey's burger here, because the Cavs are going to be without Collin Sexton. Word breaking here about an hour or so ago that he's done for the year. He had surgery on that torn meniscus in his knee.
Yeah, obviously a major blow to a season that had been going very well, can still go very well. You have to Sexton's played 11 games. His scoring average was down from 24.3 last season to 16.0 this year, and that is not an indictment of him. Instead, that's kind of a celebration of him because he took a step back purposely to be a better fit. And I thought through those first 11 games, even though he wasn't scoring as much, I really liked what I saw from him in terms of fitting in with a team that now, when healthy, whenever that might be, has Evan Mobley and Darius Garland and Jared Allen and Lauri Markkanen and Ricky Rubio and tons of guys who can score points. So he didn't need to be a volume scorer, volume shooter. And I was impressed that he recognized that. So big blow, obviously, to the Cavaliers in the sense that, this is going to be a really big season for their finding out how well Sexton fits and the long-term plans for him. What's so interesting about this, John, of course, is he's going to be a restricted free agent at the end of the season. And he's not going to, nobody's going to know where to go in terms of a contract and all that type of stuff at the end of the year. Now the bargaining power shifts to the Cavs, which they probably already had, but they had obviously been talking some trades about him, or at least exploring. Nothing got serious or close, but they've been doing that, and now that's done. So it's a very interesting situation. I would compare it to kind of, I was compared it to Lonzo Ball situation where there may be a sign and trade at the end of the season. Now you kind of got to look at it almost like Spencer Dinwiddie, who missed all of last year with the Nets after suffering an early season knee injury, and now is with the Wizards. I'm not saying that's going to be the case with Collin Sexton, but you're going to have a whole different approach now to not only the season, but to free agents.
Well, it just goes to show anything can happen in this league in an instant. When you think you've got everything figured out, you get dealt an awful injury that kills you the rest of the season if you're Collin Sexton. And for him, you got to feel bad for him because he wanted that extension this past summer and didn't get it. You mentioned the trade rumors floating around. You and I have talked about that extensively over the last few podcast episodes. But on a personal level, man, he had been dealing with a lot with that, taking a little bit of a back seat in terms of what the Cavaliers were doing with the lineups and with Garland, and it was working. His numbers were dropping a little bit, turnover ratio a little higher. Same with Garland. We've talked about that before, but still he seemed like he was starting to buy into the program that Bickerstaff and company were presenting, and it was working in wins. It still is, even without him on the floor, despite the recent skid. But now the future is really interesting and intriguing and a little murky what the Cavs are going to do. He is a restricted free agent. We can talk about this all spring and winter in summer, what they're going to do, they'll probably retain him on a contract, but he's not going to get that big contract. I don't know how you can trade him coming off a knee injury. But interesting decisions do lie ahead now. So what do the Cavs do to replace him now? Because you brought Rubio in to back up Garland and Sexton at the point. Cavs need another guard.
Yeah, well, first things first, I would imagine they're going to keep seeing if Isaac Okoro can fill that role. And if, maybe you just look at it like we need Okoro to fill the role and this is his time to shine. This is his opportunity. The door is open and you're going to bring Garland in. Now, maybe if Okoro is not getting it done, you start Okoro and, he plays 15 minutes a game and Rubio plays the rest. So that's one option that I'm sure will be considered. I think clearly you're going to give Isaac Okoro the first crack at it. And if that, if it doesn't pan out and he is kind of up and down like he's been now, mostly down, at least in the scoring department, I don't think you're going to make a trade, but you've got to figure out a lineup. And you probably going to end up signing somebody or calling somebody up from the Charge to start. My guess is the early approach to this is going to be starting Okoro at the 2, and then, bringing up somebody from the Charge and giving them an opportunity. Right now, Kyle Guy, the former Virginia star who was with the Kings, has been absolutely tearing it up with the Cleveland Charge, has been averaging like 25 a game. This may open a door for him to be called up. RJ Nembhard, who the Cavs signed to a 2-way contract, will probably get a shot here. He's 6'5" shooting guard. He's a 2-way player. My guess is these guys are now going to get an opportunity, especially, Sexton aside, there's, as we're going to address on the podcast here shortly, there's just been so many other injuries that they're probably going to have to call somebody up anyway, from the G League. So I think that's going to be the first order of business is Okoro's going to get a shot. We're going to see probably more Denzel Valentine. This may not be news that thrills fans. I don't know. I think it's intriguing and it gives them an opportunity to see what they really have. At shooting guard, we're probably going to see more of Windler, more of Cedi Osman, even though, Cedi's been playing well and we've seen plenty of him. He's going to get more of an opportunity. They're going to, that's going to be the approach at practice. Hey, this job is open because we want to bring Ricky Rubio off the bench. That's the plan with him because he does so well there. I think, and if none of that works, then they're going to have to start Rubio. But I think that's going to be the early plan is to try Okoro, call up some of these G League guys, bring Rubio off the bench. And, again, Cedi will be in the mix too. I don't think he'll be a 2 guard, but he'll be in the mix for more minutes. So there's certainly a door is open there for somebody new to step up. And I think that's the best you could do. And then, you got to have scoring. Even though he's only averaging 16 a game this year, he's capable of scoring 35, 40. So you may have to make a deal at some point if your goal is the playoffs. And right now it is. They don't care about playing. The next draft isn't supposed to be that great. They don't care about that as much as we want to get into that playing game, get these guys some postseason experience. And in order to do that, you may have to make a deal, small level deal of some sort.
Cavs are 2-4 without Sexton since going down in November. 7th was that in New York?
Yes,
with that injury. And it's funny, in those 6 games, Sam, they haven't scored 100 points during that stretch either. So they're missing some of that scoring, but their also defense has been pretty good during that stretch as well. He had surgery 2 days ago on November 17th. To repair that meniscus. And the good thing for Collin, even though that he's going to miss the season, it's better that they address that issue with him now as opposed to potentially, rehabbing him and maybe rushing him back. I don't know. And then maybe re-injuring it and then jeopardizing his start to next season. That way he gets a full spring and summer rehab and he can come back full health for the beginning of the season in 2022, 2023. So, it's a tough blow, but the Cavs have been dealing with a lot of injuries, as we'll talk about coming up here on this podcast shortly here, and we'll see what happens.
I think it'll be a very interesting, as unfortunate as it is, it'll be an interesting experiment to see how other guys use this opportunity to step up and step in, and it makes for a very intriguing offseason with Collin and what the Cavs decide to do. But you know what, more power to him. Hope he heals fast and well, and I assume he's going to be a member of the team for a while. So let's keep our fingers crossed that he can come back the same.
And hope for no issues in that rehab, no setbacks. Cavs back in action coming up here on Monday, November 22nd against the Nets. We're going to be talking more Cavaliers and reminiscing of Cavaliers of old. If you're old enough to remember the old Coliseum days, hopefully we got some older listeners out there on the pod. We're going to be going into the Whitey's restaurant here very shortly, where Sam and I recorded the pod earlier today, but this is the emergency section we just had to have. And I guess we'll get that going here from Whitey. Sam, we'll be talking again soon. Until then, let's head over back to Whitey's in Richfield for this edition of Cavs on the Break, an NBA podcast right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. Welcome in, everyone. If you can hear the faint noise in the background of this podcast, that would be the noise of the, would you call it world famous?
I would say world famous, at least to people in Ohio. We can say, now maybe in Wyoming they don't know about it, but here in Ohio it's world famous.
You always got to put a world famous on something, even though that no one outside of a neighborhood wouldn't know what it is, but it just sounds better, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, that noise is the world famous Whitey's restaurant in Richfield. This is where Sam and I are recording the pod, and this means kind of a lot to us in a way. It's a little nostalgia feel as we talk about the Cavs on this episode, because this restaurant, for those that don't know, especially our younger listeners, this was a spot when the Cavs played right down the road, probably 2-3 miles away at the Richfield Coliseum. This was a spot where former Cavs players, visiting players, would always come after games, and when they would come in town, if they had a couple hours to kill, they'd come into Whitey's, this same little restaurant here, to have a couple burgers. And there's been famous players that have been through here, as well as other little spots around town. There's not many.
Right.
I think one of the Holiday Inn bar was big. I heard famous Boston writer Dan Shaughnessy recently on talking on 92.3 The Fan, talking about how when you'd cover the Celtics in those years against the Cavs, that he would meet a lot of the players, and that's how you writers would get scoops. You'd sit there at the bar in the Holiday Inn here in Richfield and talk.
And I've been in that Holiday Inn, and if you go in there, you can tell that in the 70s and 80s, it was a big deal. I mean, it's a huge hotel.
Yeah.
They haven't really updated the decor from the 70s and 80s in there, but you can tell I was in there thinking, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird used to walk these halls.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Richfield definitely has a lot of Cavs history, obviously, and Whitey's is a part of that.
As well as the Tavern of Richfield, which has since closed, but it's reopening in something else. And then there's a little spots around, like Fisher's Cafe and Winking Lizard down there, right on the river, was always a big spot, too. Yes. So that's the noise you hear. So it's not the crisp quality sound that you're going to hear, but it gives you a little ambient noise of good food, good beer, and good memories in here. If these walls could talk, Sam, they would tell you a lot about former players, Cavs, and others.
Yeah, the coaches, all those, everybody involved in the organization at one time was probably, I would say most people know about Whitey's in this area, but certainly back then, Fratello, all the way through Fratello and Kemp, and all the way until the team stopped playing in Richfield.
Mark Price told me that he would come here and he would always get a burger. They're known for their burgers. They've got a ton in here. I didn't ask him which one, but he said this was the spot to get a good burger. Some of the best burgers you're ever going to have is here at Whitey. So before Sam and I start eating, we want to talk Cavaliers basketball. And the last time you and I talked 2 weeks ago on the pod, the Cavs were off to a surprisingly fast start. And really, they're still playing great basketball, but since our last chat, Sam, the injury bug has come in a fury and has knocked out some guys. Collin Sexton with the torn meniscus in his knee, Lauri Markkanen and Kevin Love, COVID protocols, Isaac Okoro hamstring, he has since come back, may not be 100%. And
And then the more serious one, the scarier one, would be Evan Mobley there with the elbow sprain out 2 to 4 weeks. Those guys, it's been killing their depth, but for whatever reason, this team has been playing outstanding in these games that they've lost. They're currently on a 3-game losing streak, but they're playing excellent without those guys.
Yeah, and of course they were missing Jared Allen too there for a couple of games with the illness.
Yep.
A lot of that, I think, has been the result of culture, which has changed. I think the guys on the bench who are now getting some time, and before I go any further, of course, against the Warriors, they were also missing Chetty,
right?
Because he had back spasms. So, I mean, it's just a never-ending list. But I think the result of the fact that these guys that usually aren't playing a ton, the Ed Davises of the world, the Denzel Valentines, some of these other guys who aren't seeing a lot of minutes that are getting minutes now and producing, just want to keep a good thing going. And granted, they're not getting wins. They don't have enough guys to get the wins, but they do have enough guys to keep this really what seems to be a positive culture. The result of J.B. Bickerstaff's coaching, the result of what the players in front of them had been building, and it's been, you lose to Golden State by 15 points at home, yet you watch that game and you walk away with your head held high because of the effort they gave and the opportunities they gave themselves against the best team in the Western Conference right now. And then you look also, John, against the Nets on the road. They got down big. They could have given up. They fought back. And, I mean, really, this is a team you're talking about really has one starter of the original starting 5 from the beginning of the season. Unless you put Okoro in there too. But with Darius Garland, this is basically Darius Garland, Ricky Rubio, and then everybody else has kind of been new in terms of the starting lineup. Ed Davis is new in terms of getting playing time, and here he's gone from the end of the bench to the starting center, and the guy ends up with 14 rebounds against the Warriors. So,
which is incredible when you look at it.
Yeah, it's really just a cultural thing that you have to, that's all you can say is this team has culture that it had been lacking, positive culture that had been lacking over the last couple of years.
And you got to really give a lot of that to the front office with Kobe Altman and getting these guys in here, and really J.B. Bickerstaff and what he's done. And you and I have talked a lot about him and what he's been able to do with that culture in previous episodes as well. I am shocked at how this team, it seems like any adversity they're thrown at them, they take it and run with it, and they don't roll over and die. This team has really seemed to thrive with, like you said, like an Ed Davis of the world, that Denzel Valentine coming up in some key minutes for some of these guys that you would never even think would even have a remotely opportune time to really play a role in this team. I think the two biggest factors, too, and we kind of alluded to this a little bit on the previous episode, too, has been the play of Darius Garland and Ricky Rubio's leadership in his play, too. I mean, I never in a million years thought Rubio would have had this much effect when it comes to the offensive production, the defensive play, and really just what he's been able to do with Garland when they're either both on the floor or when they're both not on the floor together. I'm really surprised to see how they've been able to mold and really kind of get this team into an offensive set.
I think the Cavs are surprised by that, too. I don't know that they expected Ricky Rubio to be this good when they made that trade. I don't think the Timberwolves expected him to be this good, or they probably wouldn't have traded him just for Taurean Prince. So he's really been, a godsend in terms of basketball when it comes to what this team wants to do for the reasons you listed. Not only has he been great off the bench, we heard Collin Sexton talking about him, and he said, Collin Sexton, this is the beginning of the year, admitted, things can get a little wild out there with us sometimes, with me and Darius, and Ricky comes in and calms everything down and gets us in our sets and just calms the situation down. But then on top of that, he's had some of those scoring eruptions that have just been fantastic. He's so good with the ball in terms of knowing when to take the shot, knowing when to pass, is an outstanding passer. I think that we knew Ricky Rubio was known for his ball handling and passing, but it's off the charts this year and a huge reason that they've been able to build this culture. You know, when they traded for Rubio, I think a lot of people thought, well, he's better than Matthew Dellavedova in terms of a backup point guard, but he's helping to change the course of the franchise right now. And that sounds funny from an older guy who was really kind of looking to get to the Phoenix Suns in the offseason. But I just think that with him and his leadership, they needed a veteran leader. I kept writing that over and over and over last season. This team does not have a veteran leader. He doesn't have to be a veteran all-star. They need somebody who can come in and that the other guys respect. Well, that's who Rubio has become. Now it helps having Kevin Love healthy and coming off the bench now that he's finally out of the protocols again. Those two guys, theoretically, both coming off the bench when everybody's healthy, that is a huge boost because those guys are so much better than a lot of teams' reserves because most teams' reserves are young.
Right.
So having those two guys come in and reserve when, you know, the Jared Allens, Markkanens, Evan Mobleys are healthy has just been such a boost to not only staying competitive but to getting, you know, wins, to starting 9-5 as the Cavs did. So that type of veteran play was much needed, and here it is.
It's crazy to think Ricky Rubio's having a career season in terms of his production, averaging 15 points a game. Sam, isn't it crazy to think that in his entire career he never averaged 15 points a game?
It really is. If you've watched him play this year, you know, the fact that last year it was 8.6 points per game, and really was in a similar type of situation, you know. I mean, the Timberwolves were, at that time, and still are, a rebuilding team, and he just kind of seemed like, I don't know, he came here and has been a much better fit than he was, and here he is at the, you know, what everybody considers an advanced age in the NBA. And he's like I said, I don't think the Cavs expected him to have this year. Nobody expected him to have the kind of summer he did in the Olympics for Spain. I mean, he was killing it. He was like Allen Iverson or something for Spain this year. So, no, it's a big surprise, and it's a very pleasant surprise.
And it's interesting you mentioned that the Olympics, because he got traded during the Olympics, and and he wasn't happy about coming to Cleveland and being traded, but you know, he embraced the role after talking to the Cavs, and I know he talked to Kevin Love, but it didn't affect his play in Spain, which just goes to show how much of a pro he really is. You mentioned Kevin Love, 17 points last night in the loss to the Warriors, coming off the bench, now healthy. It gives his team a big boost, and you mentioned the Rubio Love factor, and these two guys played together in Minnesota back in the day. People forget about that. It just goes to show how much they've actually been in the league, but also their chemistry, but also their leadership roles as well. So that can't go unnoticed, and Bickerstaff knows that too. So when you have those two guys coming off the bench, I know Rubio's starting now because of the injury to Collin Sexton. It bodes well for this team in terms of in my opinion, in a attitude-wise, but also with the younger guys too. You know, seeing these two veterans come off the bench when they're fully healthy and seeing what they can do, but also it kind of sends a nice message to those guys too, and they're also there to help. You know, these two players, these two veteran guys have been big mentors too for a lot of those guys, regardless of what we hear about Kevin Love's attitude and what he's done in the past like that. You know, the other thing, we talk about some of these losses real quick. The loss to Boston, which came weird on a weird back-to-back home schedule, which is a weird scheduling quirk. They lost to the Nets and they lost to the Warriors last night as we record this here on Friday. All of those games with a depleted team against, you know, two of the best teams in the league in Brooklyn and Golden State.
It could be in the finals.
It could be in the finals, yet they battled with these guys to the very end, late in the fourth quarter. I would have never thought, with all those injuries, this team would have done that. I mean, you look at that, it's remarkable. Now, they're off until Monday, which they badly need help. Some time off to get healthy to play the Nets again. But, you know, I think we're going to get to a point here where, even though now they're 9-8 and they've lost 3 straight, you know, they're going to probably maybe dip under the 500 mark a little bit. If that happens, fine.
Yeah, sure.
It's okay, but you're still building. And you're still building something that we would want to see, maybe an accelerated process, really. They may be ahead of the curve.
Yeah. Well, first of all, going back to what you said about Love, I think he's going to be up and down most of the year. His performance against the Warriors, 17 points, 7 rebounds, was all around, the stats aside, was one of his best performances in a couple of years.
That's true.
You know, he had a really good game against them. But he's going to be up and down, I suspect, most of the season. And guess what? This time it's okay because he's a reserve. And that's what you expect from reserves, is to kind of be inconsistent. They're going to have huge nights. They're going to have other nights like Kevin Love has had this year with 4 points. And that's okay. But, you know, so I think that the fact that they're not as reliant on him and that he's embraced this role has been huge for them. As for the games that you were talking about with, you know, the Nets and the Warriors, first of all, I'm convinced, and I hate when people say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, I'm convinced they would have beaten the Warriors if they had had either Jared Allen or Evan Mobley, because they were playing so well against them. They just ran out of gas, they ran out of talent, they ran out of steam, and that's going to happen. You know, and maybe they would have beaten the Nets with one of, not both those guys, but one of them even.
I'd like to think they would, and I agree with you. And it's interesting, you know, Steph Curry blew up in the fourth quarter. Sure. He scored 20 of his 40 points in the fourth quarter.
Which he does against everybody, so they don't need to feel bad.
Exactly. So that you're going to get that. But to supplement some of the other side on the offensive struggles and some of those possessions, you got to think Allen or Mobley. That's a bad mismatch for a team like Golden State. The Cavs are so big.
Yeah,
you know,
well, especially Mobley, the way he can play and defend, kind of out on the perimeter. He kind of plays that Golden State style of basketball, but he's got size. So that would have been, you know, he would have been a huge presence. But you're right. Anybody else who could have scored in that game, they got 17 points off the bench from Love and then 3 from the rest of the bench, which, you know, I mean, you can't. That's just, it is what it is. You can't expect those other guys to contribute greatly right now. And they, like I said, they were missing Chetty that game too, so that hurts.
It hurts their bench and any options that they have on there. Dean Wade played a pretty good game last night too. Absolutely. 17 points. He's come on strong. He's been a good guy to come off the bench when he's not in the starting lineup. Is someone that's can, you know, pump in 10 points here or there. I know he had 17 last night, but you like to see his progression and his progress of improving, you know, his game. That's someone that I didn't really put a little spotlight on in the early part of the preseason or anything like that, you know. But I'd like to see that too.
Well, the one thing to think about is guys like Dean Wade that are getting a lot of minutes now, Dylan Windler, Denzel Valentine. Those younger players, I don't know Valentine's necessarily as young as those guys, but right. My point is those inexperienced guys playing against the Nets and the Warriors, I'm assuming at some point that the Cavs are going to be healthy and, you know, they're going to have Markkanen and Allen and Mobley and have all those guys. And when they do, you know, you're going to have a Dean Wade who got to play a lot of minutes against a team that's a championship contender, 2 teams in the Warriors and Nets.
Yeah.
So this is invaluable. As much as the losses, you know, you want to make the playoffs, you're excited about that possibility now. Mm-hmm. As much as those losses hurt in that end, they're getting invaluable experience. Those younger guys like the Wades, the Windlers, and some of the others, even the Okoros, who's getting a lot of time that, you know, he may or may not be getting with everybody healthy. Is, you know, he's not going to play 43 minutes like he did against the Warriors if everybody's healthy. Right. So those guys are getting invaluable experience. And then guess what? When the Cavs do get healthy, again, this is a huge assumption based on what's been going on, but when they do, these guys are going to be better for it because they've played against the Warriors and the Nets and gotten, you know, the Celtics and gotten these big games experience.
So one thing that I wanted to bring up, we talk about Markkanen, and it's a bummer that he has not been playing. He's missed so many games now due to COVID protocols. I really wanted, he was the guy that I thought could be an interesting piece, and we've talked about this on previous episodes of our podcast, just in terms of, you know, how he can fit in, you know, what he can give you off the bench. You know, they gave him the big contract after the trade. I talked to Mike Fratello, former Cavs coach, and he's going to come up on my podcast with my brother, Sabol Brothers on the Baseline, in an episode that's going to drop in 2 weeks from now. And we spent an hour and a half talking. It's going to be a 2-part podcast, little kind of teaser here. But I talked to him about this current team, and I asked him 2 questions. One, is this the way the lineup the Cavs have with all these bigs and running the smaller guys, if it's going to be sustainable? You and I have talked about it. We know it's worked kind of with Milwaukee and the Lakers a little bit. Obviously, the Cavs aren't on that championship level, but he says it is sustainable. He thinks it can work, and it's funny. And some of our younger listeners may not remember this or may not have been born during this time. And he brought up a great point, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're totally right. He said it reminds him a lot of the Cavs teams he's coached in the mid to late 90s when he had the big lineups of Zydrunas Ilgauskas, Vitaly Potapenko, Sean Kemp was on that team, Michael Cage was on that team. They had big, tall guys. That's before the NBA got rid of the center position in a way.
Right.
Yet the Cavs had small guards during those times. Terrell Brandon, Bobby Sura, I'm trying to think who else. Wesley Person was on that team. I know he was a shooting guard there, but I mean they had some pieces there in those years. Brevin Knight too was another one where it worked, and you need to have the right system, the right coaching personnel in place to complement your roster. Yes, you can say that about anybody, but in this NBA where it's all three athletic guards, less emphasis on bigs, can this way the Cavs had this hot start, can this really work? He totally agreed, and he thinks it will work. And he thinks the way Bickerstaff has been able to coach these guys in the system that he has in place complements to their strengths. And if there's a guy to do it, it's him. And if he has the personnel to do it, it's the current Cavs. I thought that was really interesting.
That's very interesting. Danny Ferry was on those teams too, as was 5'10" Scott Brooks, who later went on to become an NBA coach.
Scott Brooks.
Yeah. Scott Brooks, who was 5'10", and Zydrunas, who was 7'1" or 2", were roommates.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah,
Very
they were
cool.
roommates. Scott Brooks has a lot of great stories about his rooming with Big Z. But anyway, going back to the Cavs, comparing those Cavs, I think one thing too that's very true is that what I like about this team is they haven't followed the protocol of what the NBA said you have to do to be successful. They've gone the opposite direction. And, Worldwide Wob tweeted that out. He said, the rest of the NBA, small ball, Cavs, yeah, we have 3 7-footers. So, when it comes to those guys and that kind of approach, I'm with Coach Mike. It's that it is sustainable. And I think Markkanen, too, the one thing I'll say about him is, I always say this about NBA guys who go to a new team. Try to think about yourself going to a new job with all new coworkers. It's a little awkward at first. Anything you say is viewed as, well, why is he talking? Or, you feel out of place. It usually takes like 6 months to not be the new guy anymore. So with Markkanen, if he's a little bit up and down with the Cavs right now, I'm just like, whatever. He's new.
Chalk it up to trying to fit in. And that was my other point to Fratello. He said, give me one guy outside of Allen or Mobley or Garland that you really want to keep your eye on that could be a big difference maker throughout the rest of the season. He said Markkanen.
Yeah, and I would agree there because he's because Mobley has been so good and such a find and looks like the next Kevin Garnett minus the fiery personality, but as far as his actual play, that's who he reminds me of. If it wasn't for him, there would be a lot more buzz, I think, about Markkanen and what he's doing. It's nice that Mobley and Garland and Rubio and those guys are really kind of the main focal point in what everybody's talking about because it gives Markkanen time to not be that focus. And I think that, again, Coach Mike is right on that where, look, this guy eventually, and he's had some nice nights when he's been healthy. But very underrated nights. But he's another guy who you think could just has the potential to erupt into something special for them. It's a matter of fitting in. He's not going to rebound like Kevin Love, but he could be kind of like a younger Kevin Love in terms of production when it comes to helping you win ball games. Like, hey, look, this guy scored 20 points in the first quarter like Kevin Love did a couple of times, So he has that type of offensive potential, and I think for him, it's just a matter for Markkanen. It's just a matter of fitting in, and that takes time once you got traded to a new team.
Yeah, it does. It doesn't matter the sport. You can say that for anything.
Absolutely.
And you're going to get that with him off nights and some solid nights as well. And I think once he kind of gets comfortable with himself and once he gets through the COVID protocols, I think he's got a nice niche on this team, especially with the blossoming of these younger players. So I thought Mike Fratello, when he told us that was really, he hit spot on that. And it's great to hear that from a head coach. You know, people forget, Mike Fratello has been in the NBA since the 70s. He's been around as a coach.
Hubie Brown, disciple. Everybody knows Hubie Brown from the TV work. And, you know, I know those guys are all from New Jersey. Yeah. Mike Fratello is no taller than me. You know, he never played basketball. He was a boxer. And so his whole life has really been around the coaching, scouting aspect of the NBA. And it's really great to hear him say, to plug your podcast, I would encourage people to listen to it because he's got some really good insight, obviously, on the Cavs.
Yeah, and for those, I'll do a little shameless plug here. For those that don't know, that's on my podcast with my brother Scott Sabol, right here on the Press Play Podcast Network on Sabol Brothers on the Baseline. We'll have a two-parter with Mike Fratello. And for those who like to reminisce and feel the nostalgia of the Cavs, like Sam and I right now are doing here at Whitey's restaurant in Richfield, Ohio, Mike and I, and my brother too, all of us, we do that. We go on those old Cavs teams. We touch on the Ron Harper trade, when he was the coach for the Hawks. Yeah. We talk about the Price era, and then when he first got the job in Cleveland, which is kind of weird to think about. I know we're going off on a tangent here, but it's weird. When Fratello got the job, the guy he replaced was Lenny Wilkens.
Yeah.
And the guy that replaced Mike Fratello in Atlanta was Lenny Wilkens.
Yeah, a funny story about that. This is, of course, before the days of Twitter and, frankly, before the internet. Jeff Phelps, who is a good friend of mine, we grew up on the same street and later co-hosted Cavs in the Paint. And I remember Jeff saying, "Don't you know everybody who grew up on our street thinks, what are those two idiots doing together on television?" Which I wouldn't blame anybody for thinking that. But anyway, Jeff and I walked in. Lenny Wilkens had been let go by the Cavs. This would have been 1993. Jeff Phelps and I walked into the TGI Fridays at in Montrose, near Fairlawn, Copley area. And we walked in there on a Friday night, and Lenny Wilkens had been let go. And there is Wayne Embry sitting with Mike Fratello in the Fridays, sitting there just, having dinner. Jeff and I walked up, "Hey guys, how you doing?" Today's world, I could have tweeted that out, would have had a huge scoop, but back then I just told my friends, And of course I hadn't been working as a reporter, believe it or not. I was still too young then, but that was just something else. And then sure enough, like 3 days later, Fratello was officially named coach of the Cavs.
So they probably negotiated, and I'd have to ask Mike this, but they probably negotiated his contract at Fridays over like a burger or something.
Where else better to do it, right? Back in the day.
They should have come here to the Whiteys.
I know that Dan Gilbert, when the Cavs were undergoing a coaching change, and it was after the Mike Brown had gotten fired.
The first time?
The first time, yeah. Dan Gilbert and Eric Musselman, who's now the coach of Arkansas, and of course his dad, Bill Musselman, was the coach of the Cavs in the 1980s.
And didn't Eric also coach the Warriors too?
Eric coached the Warriors and the Sacramento Kings after that.
Right.
And then he actually was an assistant under Hubie Brown with the Grizzlies for a little bit. But he met Dan Gilbert at P.F. Chang's at Summit Mall, and they had their job interview there. And Eric said maybe Dan didn't like the food because Eric didn't get the job. Of course, he's doing very well for himself at the University of Arkansas right now. But yeah, so coming out to the Fairlawn, Richfield, Copley area clearly is still a big deal amongst the Cavs when they're interviewing.
So I guess what you're saying is whenever there's going to be a big change, hopefully not this season because that means the Cavs didn't do so well. But whenever there's a change going forward down the road, whether it's a coaching change, whether it's going to be a general manager change, we need to scope out different restaurants and have teams, like have our own little posse hanging out somewhere around there, right?
Yeah,
just like our little spies trying to figure out.
Kobe's more of a downtown Cleveland guy and closes off the room. I don't know that for sure, but in today's day and age, you kind of have to do that because idiots like me will be tweeting it out otherwise, or putting it on our websites, and I don't blame them for staying hidden today.
Yeah,
but it still doesn't hurt. hurt to check out the Fairlawn Copley area if they're making a change.
That's funny about Mike Fratello and TGI Fridays. I'm gonna have to ask him about that.
Yeah, you have to ask. It was him. I think it was him and Ron Rothstein might have been there too, who was a longtime assistant of
for the Cavs, right?
Yeah, and
wasn't he also an assistant under Wilkins too, or was he only an assistant under Fratello?
Rothstein,
Yeah.
I think he eventually became the Cavs interim coach for a little bit.
Okay.
And he was coach of the Heat, maybe, if I remember correctly.
Or am I thinking of Sidney Lowe?
Sidney Lowe was the assistant under Fratello.
Okay.
And then got the Timberwolves job, and
that's
and now he's back.
But now
with
he's
the
back,
Cavs.
right?
Yeah.
But he also coached at NC State, right?
He was a player at NC State. He might have been an assistant. He was a player on the 1983 team that upset Phi Slamma Jamma with Akeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler. So this is the historical things that the current Cavs audience, I'm sure, is tuning into the podcast for.
And for those, he did coach at NC State 2006 to 2011.
Okay.
How about that? I don't know.
Gosh, yeah, his alma mater.
I don't know how I remember that, Sam, but I do.
I remember that whole starting lineup. I was a little kid, but I was watching that game when they upset Phi Slamma Jamma, and I just remember that whole. I could probably, if you really pressed me, I could name that starting lineup, because back when you were a kid, that's all you thought about. That's all that mattered.
Yeah,
I see it with my own kids now.
I'm a little younger than you, but I remember growing up in Cleveland when I would watch the Cavs and the Indians and the Browns. I would always, this is how old school I am in a way. Kids nowadays do this because they have their phones. Every day after a Cavs or an Indians game, I would read the paper.
Yeah.
And I would check the box score of the Cavs and the Indians.
Yeah.
And, my parents got the Akron Beacon Journal back then, and they still do. And I think now they get the Plain Dealer. And I would look at the box score. I would memorize just the lineups for all the teams of those eras.
Yeah.
Like a random team. I don't know why, but I would know like the 1997 San Francisco Giants. I mean, I'm just memorizing box scores of guys or their starting lineups. And back in those days, you're a writer, you remember how it was with newspapers, you had an entire page devoted to box scores and standings.
Yeah.
And
leaders and all that. The funny thing about that, too, is I was a big Golden State Warriors fan back in the day.
The Mullen era?
The Run TMC era. Mullen and Richmond and Tim Hardaway. Well, we got the Akron Beacon Journal, too, because I grew up in Cuyahoga Falls.
I think I know where you're going with this.
You had to wait an extra day. I couldn't find out what the Warriors did. Say if they had a Tuesday game, Tuesday night. Well, it didn't make the paper on Wednesday's paper because the game was so late it went past the deadline. So I had to wait till Thursday to find out what the Warriors did. I had to wait 2 days after the game because nobody in Cleveland was... they weren't putting that on the news. They weren't talking about it on the radio.
Right.
I would have to go to a paper 2 days later to find out what the teams, even if you were following like Magic Johnson's Lakers or any of those teams, you had to wait a couple days to figure it out.
I remember when the Cavs would go on those West Coast trips, they'd like 7 or 8, 7 games in like 10 days. You'd go to the paper the next day, and it just said Cavs Clippers late.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't put the box score or the game story in because the newspaper was printing while the game was still in the third quarter.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, man, where am I going to find, how did Mark Price do? What did Doherty, all these guys. And you wouldn't know because, you had SportsCenter, but SportsCenter wasn't what it is now. Obviously, the internet wasn't there. I remember trying to get scores because ESPN with the bottom line, that on the TV screen, the bottom line with the score ticker, they didn't really get to that till probably late 90s, early 2000s. You'll remember who invented the bottom line was CNN.
Yes.
CNN
SI.
SI. When CNN had the precursor to that technology, into that implementation of trying to get scores out there. And I remember watching Indians trying to get Indians games too when they'd go on a West Coast trip. I'm young, I'm waiting for the I'm staying up late on the, during the summer. I'm trying to get the games. I'm falling asleep in the seventh inning when they're playing the Angels, and I wake up the next morning. I'm like, what did they do?
Yeah, right.
But it's just so funny that at that point in time, ESPN had really blossomed in those mid to late 90s, where they just have SportsCenter on for an hour from like 6 o'clock till noon, and it was just rehashed. That's how it was back then.
My oldest son I heard him joking with my middle son, saying, "Did you know Dad used to write his NBA recaps on chisel and granite?" That's how long ago they think it was. They have no concept of that. I tell them that, and they're truly amazed.
You know what you should do to your kids? Give them a VCR and give them a tape and tell them to play it.
Yeah. My wife and I went on a honeymoon recently over the spring, and we stayed in this old house that had the options of using the VCR and VCR movies. And I'm like, yeah, let's use it. And neither one of us could figure out how to do it. So we just went back to modern TV. But I'm like, now what do? You got to hit rewind? How does this work? We were lost.
We're going on a really, really random nostalgic rant here, but this is funny. You talk about VCRs. Do you remember when Blockbuster? Of course, we know Blockbuster, but do you remember when you would return a movie, you'd get fined if your movie wasn't rewound?
Yes, if it was late or not rewound.
They had that little sticker. It was a smiley face sticker they put on the tape that said, I don't know how I remember this. Feel free to make fun of me. It says, "Please be kind and rewind."
Yes, I remember that. And you know what? I remember going to Blockbuster on a Friday night was the
thing to do.
It was a cool thing to do if you were a young single guy at the time, as I was. There was always girls there that, hey, have you seen this movie? And they would say, "Get away from me, you creep," but it was worth a shot.
Right.
But and there's still one Blockbuster. It's in Oregon, and if you haven't seen that thing on Netflix yet, you got to watch it.
That's the one little random documentary that has nothing to do with sports that I want to watch.
It's awesome.
Man. All right, well, let's take a break here on Cavs on the Break, an NBA podcast right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. John Sabol alongside Hoops Wire's Sam Amico. Coming up after the break, Sam, let's talk a little NBA trades. Let's focus in on a couple guys, maybe not so much the Cavs, but let's go around the NBA and we'll talk about some guys that could be on the move. Trade deadline still 3 months away, but there's the latest chatter that you're hearing. We'll touch on that and more coming up right after this.
Hey everyone, I'm Holly Wetzel.
And I'm Jeremy Powell.
And we are your hosts of The Orange is Oranger, a Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We give you all the dog pound coverage that you'll need each week to get you ready for kickoff and beyond.
Don't miss our breakdowns of each week's matchups, game recaps, and any and all news out of Berea to feed your Browns appetite. As we all know, Holly, dogs got to eat.
That's right, Jeremy. Hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode of the Orange is Oranger Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Looking for new insights on the Cleveland sports scene with a unique side of Cleveland sports history? Then you found the perfect podcast. I'm John Sabol.
And I'm Scott Sabol, and we're hosts of the Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast, a podcast about Cleveland sports, but not your typical podcast about the land's sports teams. Join us as we embark on a journey of sharing a unique and historical side of Cleveland sports history with the help of some former Cleveland sports stars and other historical figures.
All right here on the Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
The R&R podcast going to be rocking and rolling with you because football season is underway. College, Ohio State, the Power Fives, the MAC, the Browns. Michael Regai, are you ready to rock and roll with some football?
Kenny, I've been ready. This is our time of year. This is what R&R is all about. We're going to be with you every week. Kenny just said it, Browns, NFL, Ohio State centric. So you got to stay with us all fall and winter long here on R&R.
That's right. The Regai and Rhoda podcast coming to you here on the Press Play Podcast Network. Subscribe now and don't miss a show.
Welcome back to Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. John Sabol alongside Sam Amico with Hoops Wire. So, Sam, as we're sitting here at Whitey's, about to order some food, we're watching the replay game of the Cavs Warriors last night when they lost. And they're wearing the new City throwback uniforms. Yeah. Do you love them?
I do, and I told you this before the podcast. They are the only City uniforms that I really like by the Cavs. I just like the nostalgic look. I love the look of the court. Again, I'm old enough to have remembered when the uniforms actually looked like that or close to it. So I really like the fact that, you know, they pay homage to some of their history. And, you know, I'll tell you, Jeff Phelps may not want me to repeat this, but he said, I love how the Cavs are wearing all this stuff that we threw out in the 80s and 90s. You know, so I think that's a good way to put it. And I really like these.
It's great because the uniforms, and I'm a big, if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I tweet a lot about sometimes, like, you know, some uniforms or logos, some fun little hobby of mine, right? And I love that they incorporated so many previous histories of Cavs teams in these current uniforms. Of course, the striped collars are reference to the original uniforms, and then the LeBron era, the first LeBron era. The numbers are from those mid to late 90s black and blue uniforms. Of course, the Cavs' old original logo, and then they have that same mid to late 90s secondary logo on the shorts and the current C logo on the shorts. So, and they've got the old CAVS on the belt or on the waist, which is pretty cool. And the court's great. They have the old Coliseum logo on the court and the old Gundurino logo on top of the baseline. You can't see it here as Sam turns over in the booth here to look at the TV, but it's near the State Farm logo on the on the advertising.
That's really cool.
On the bench, scoring bench there.
Well,
it's so subtle. It's on the timeline, right? You'll see right where the coaches stand, right where JB Bickerstaff is standing. So that one right there, I believe, is the Coliseum logo, and then on the visitor side is the old original Gundurino logo.
Now, are you going to be honest and tell them what you don't like about the...
We're going to go there, yeah. So I am a big proponent of the Cavs need to use and bring back the Sea Sword logo because it's just so distinguishable. It looks cool. It was on the first two Cavs uniforms they had, and then when they brought back, or when they got the new set right before LeBron left, which is a horrible uniform set that they still have, which I think they're going to redo. They used the C. The C's okay, but you can't distinguish an NBA team with the letter. We're not a baseball team,
right?
You've got
need the sword.
You need the sword. They have that shield logo, but the shield logo looks awful because it's black, and I don't like having the black. If you're wine and gold and navy, fine. Why do you need black when you have navy?
Yeah, right.
I love
that was LeBron. I think LeBron liked the dark. The black edition,
and it's a reference to the finals of 16, and I totally get it, but I think they need to do something more. And for whatever reason, man, they love that, and you see the C everywhere. You see it on social media, on their Twitter handle. They use it on their broadcast on Bally Sports. I don't know. I just find it a little annoying. The Sea Sword logo looks cool. I had a graphic designer tell me this, and who is a former NBA designer. Tim O'Grady, he had the original contract with the NBA in the 90s, told me the reason why they don't use it a lot is because, and I'm not a graphic designer, Sam, you're not either. I can't draw a straight line.
Far from it. Yeah.
I can't draw a straight line to save my life. I can tell you if something is cool or if it's garbage. But he told me that the reason why they kind of went away with it a little bit is because it's too vertical, and it's hard to put a vertical graphic in something more horizontal.
Oh, okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I still don't like it, though.
It doesn't mean we have to like it.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, my oldest son right now wants to be a graphic designer. So he's talked to me about that C. He said the same thing. Kind of needs something else with it because they're not a baseball team, and that's how baseball teams kind of are recognized by that. But I'll tell you what, I've always loved the wine and gold color scheme because really I can't really think of any other team that has that, and it's very unique to them.
There's no team in the NBA. The only team I can think of in all the professional sports that had that color scheme is Washington.
The Washington football team.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree. That's the closest thing, and they're kind of
maroon.
They push maroon and gold.
Burgundy or whatever.
Yeah.
Same family of deep wine-colored red.
Right, and I think that the Cavs, in that sense, are very unique.
I also think, real quick, before we get on the trade topics, is the wine and gold color scheme is fantastic. I love it. But they do need a full new set of new uniforms because the set they have now is awful. A big pet peeve of mine is when you look at their current uniforms with the Cleveland on the chest or just the Cavs, CAVS, the C in those logos, or in that font, doesn't even match the C that they have. That's what you call a graphic design faux pas.
Yeah.
From what I've heard.
Or they're just trying to market different C's. I don't know. I'm on your side though that it's more of a mistake.
Now I was told this by somebody who's into who has ties to the NBA marketing and a different guy. He'll go nameless, but he told me the big reason why the Cavs changed their uniforms before LeBron left was to capitalize on new merchandise, thinking that that he was going to leave. I don't know if that's true or not. But
it makes sense.
But it makes sense.
Yeah.
But also the reason why they haven't changed it since is because the Cavs haven't had anybody really to market. And you're gonna make new jerseys and new uniforms. You're gonna need someone to market. And I think that's starting to change now with Mobley and Garland and maybe Allen. So if there's a time to maybe switch out new uniforms and go with something old school like this mashup of these city uniforms, why not do it maybe next year? It takes a year. You know that it takes a year.
It takes a year. Yeah. Which isn't a big surprise, but it might not be a bad idea. But I think it's exciting. It's an exciting time for them to maybe think about something. And plus, I mean, look, this year Cleveland's hosting the All-Star game. How cool is that going to be?
It's going to be great. Yeah, I can't wait for that to happen. And to your point, real quick, the floor looks fantastic. I love the old Cavaliers logo, the old Cavalier with the sword. Yes. Maybe bring him back in more of a modern way.
Yes.
Kind of like the Browns had kind of done with the elf in a way.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
All right, enough of uniform and logo talk. Let's talk NBA trades. We got a long way to go to the deadline, and really nothing has happened because the season is just still so young. But what are you hearing in some, trade chatter of some guys that could be on the move down the road, or guys that you could see that if teams turn into buyers or sellers down once we get after the holidays? First, before you go into your top 3 or 4 guys, what is the latest on Ben Simmons?
I was going to say, anytime you talk about trades, you got to talk about
I feel like Ben Simmons is like, it's a soap opera as the world turns. As the world of Ben Simmons turns, what are we hearing?
Both he and the Sixers have turned that into a mess, which really could have been a situation that, you could have worked through. The one thing to think about NBA trades, too, is all the guys who signed contracts in the offseason or were traded will be eligible to be traded, aren't eligible to be traded until December 15th. Mm-hmm. So that's probably one of the holdups in the Simmons deal. A lot of teams are wondering, okay, he's not reporting to the Sixers because he's not mentally ready to play. Is he just not mentally ready to play for the Sixers, or is he not mentally ready to play? If you're an opposing GM, these are the things you got to figure it out. Now, he said he's not mentally ready to play, or practice, but he has been practicing with the St. Joseph's University basketball team there in Philadelphia. So that kind of adds another wrinkle to that. Now, obviously, everybody's heard about the Ben Simmons stuff. They heard the Cavs have been engaged. I don't know how recent that is. I don't suspect it's been real recent. We've heard the Sixers have talked with the Pistons about Jeremy Grant and Kelly Olynyk and potentially some draft picks in there. I don't know what I would like that trade for the Sixers. I don't know what the Pistons would do with Ben Simmons and Cade Cunningham. That might be a weird fit.
That is an odd fit, yeah. When you said that, I was like, what? How does that work?
Yeah, I don't know. But I think that's just one. Now we've heard, I've had it on the website about the Sixers, Sam Amico from The Athletic reporting that the Sixers have a list of 30 guys that they would be willing to take back in the Simmons trade, and they're obviously shooting very high. James Harden, Bradley Beal, Damian Lillard. Now, James Harden could be an interesting thing because his contracts, he's due for a contract extension at the end of the season. I can't imagine that the Sixers would hold out hope to wait till the end of the season for James Harden. Obviously, Daryl Morey used to be the GM of the
Houston.
Rockets. Mm-hmm. When Harden was there, they think they like each other, and then Morey maybe try to get Harden in a sign and trade, and that might be possible depending on what happens with the Nets. Morey, of course, a Medina Highland grad, another Northeast. I'm guessing he's been to Whitey's as well. So, anyway,
I would think so, right?
you would hope, but so there's a lot to be. I think people I've talked to around the league say they don't think the Simmons deal is going to end up being a Ben Simmons for whoever straight up type of deal. While it could be, a lot of people are thinking they're going to need to bring in a third team, the Sixers will, to help facilitate a trade and get the guy back that they want. So I suspect that there will be a Ben Simmons trade next month in December, after this December 15th deadline for off-season guys to be eligible, because then you're going to have a whole new pool of players to work out. Teams such as, say, the Blazers, Wizards, and Nets are going to see what they might need if they need to make a big splash of a move. But I'll tell you what, Ben Simmons needs to help himself if he is practicing with St. Joe's, showing that he's mentally ready. He needs to get over that narrative. Now, if he's not mentally ready, then he's not, but then he wouldn't be practicing. So if he wants to get moved, which by all accounts he does, he needs to help himself by saying, I'm mentally ready, or getting... I just don't think he wants to be with the Sixers. And if you don't, come out and say that.
Yeah.
But don't use this other stuff as an excuse if that's all it is. So I think that, that's a big thing. But that, of course, is going to carry on for a little bit.
All right, a couple things I want to touch on that you just said there. One is the James Harden factor is interesting. I feel like that's kind of silly in a way, but his contract does make it intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
Still probably,
I think it's a long shot,
but it's still very much a long shot. The Pistons with a rookie with Cunningham, you're really going to pair someone that could be a bad locker room guy and his attitude on the court with a rookie like Cunningham? I guess that would be such a Detroit Pistons thing to do, because that franchise has not been run really well.
Exactly, and I love Jeremy Grant. I think that he's a great fit there. He plays hard. You got to like the guy.
The third thing is, why doesn't he just come out and say, I don't want to be here? Why is he trying to play, almost kind of turn it into he's the victim?
Yeah,
way.
I don't know the answer to that. I think
the whole thing's a mess.
It doesn't make a sense, and the Sixers have made a mess of it themselves by just not being able to move him before the season. I thought was a bad move. You knew you wanted to move him, and then saying, well, we might try to keep him this year. I just think that they are asking too much for him, and they just have not helped the situation. As you said, Ben Simmons has not helped the situation. Both parties have equally done a great job of turning this into a situation that everybody else wants to avoid. If you're a team that is going to trade with him, you kind of want to avoid it for now.
So Ben Simmons is one guy. Give me some other ones that you're thinking of chatter or trade chatter that you've heard that we should maybe keep our eyes and ears locked to as the months progress.
More recently, with Boston being so up and down, and I know that Brad Stevens has come out and said we're not. I said he told Jaylen Brown we're not trading you. Well, that is for the time being. Everybody is saying if they don't get that figured out, Boston doesn't turn this around, and they're playing around 500 still, maybe after December 15th or at the February 10th trading deadline. Everybody I've talked to around the league that would know suspects that one of those guys, whether it's Brown or Tatum, are going to be on the move, because at some point you got to figure this just isn't going to work out with these two guys who have very similar styles. They're the same size. They're both very good,
right?
But at some point you got to figure out, look, maybe we can't build around both of them and we could get a lot for one of them. So why not rebuild things that way? Obviously, so I would say Jason Tatum is probably the guy they would be more ready to move, but Jaylen Brown could be moved. If one of them could be moved if they don't get this worked out, because teams are starting to call them. They've talked with the Sixers, Jaylen Brown for Ben Simmons type of deal. But there are other teams out there that would certainly get in on that.
Wow, that's crazy to think about, but it does make sense. If you're still floundering and you're up and down, why go ahead and continue to truck out the same old guys on the court if there's really no... What are you trying to accomplish then? If you're going to tear it down, get rid of at least one of those guys.
And you could get a lot back.
And you could, especially at Tatum.
Yeah.
Tatum, I loved that kid when he was at Duke, and then when he came out
He's a good player. Both he and Brown are both remarkable talents.
And that team, I mean, they both have experience too. Those teams went deep in the playoffs too when LeBron and the Cavs eventually, got the best of them. But wow, Tatum, that's interesting. That's a good one.
Yeah.
And of course, there's always that as the world turns in LA, right?
Well, both of the, primarily the Lakers. Obviously, to me, without LeBron James, him being hurt, without him, they look like Anthony Davis old New Orleans Pelicans.
Agreed.
I mean, that's all they are. And you need LeBron to at least give them some semblance of hope. And even when he's been there, they haven't been great. Now, granted, he's only played, 6-7 games as of Friday going in to the Boston game. And even when he's out there, they've looked old and and they are old. They're the oldest team in NBA history if you go down the whole roster. I would not be surprised in the least to see them shake things up a little bit. They're not going to move Davis. They're not going to move LeBron. Russell Westbrook is a guy that could be moved for sure before the trade deadline if this is the way it's going to go. And if they look like they can't catch the Warriors, I don't. Obviously, the Lakers have quite a few teams in front of them now in the West. I don't think they're as good as the Utah Jazz. They're certainly not as good as the Warriors. They're not as good as the Suns. And when you have LeBron James on the team, you can't be worse than those teams because your goal every year is to get to the finals and have a shot at the championship. And they're not there. They're not anything close even with LeBron. So I think that that's a team. GM LeBron's going to put his hat on and start pushing the front office, and Rich Paul will push the front office. And, hey, give Rich Paul credit. He helped steer a championship to Cleveland, and he's trying to do the same thing with the Lakers. And, he's not running the Lakers, and neither is LeBron, but they have a big say in things. And if things don't get corrected here, some of those pieces and parts around LeBron, they're going to try to move them. And I don't think that's a big secret. That's something else. Teams such as the Clippers and Utah, and I think Phoenix is pretty well set, but those teams could look to make some moves too to stay ahead of the pack, and the Warriors are going to be getting Klay Thompson back. Who knows how good he's going to be, and James Wiseman. So they're only theoretically going to get better.
Yeah.
So I think that Boston and LA, being the big market teams that they are going to be, and all the chatter around the league is those are the two teams other than outside of Ben Simmons to really keep an eye on.
You mentioned Jason Tatum a moment ago. LeBron loves Jason Tatum.
Sure does, but what for Boston, what do you have to give Boston?
You don't have anybody.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
If you're the Lakers, you're not going to be able to go out and get another star. You've got what your idea is to go out, take some of the pieces that you have that aren't stars, the Malik Monks of the world, and use 3 or 4 of those guys and go out and get 3 or 4 guys who are better fits.
Yeah.
You're not going to get a Tatum. You're not going to get a Jaylen Brown. You're not going to get a Ben Simmons. You're not going to get even probably a John Wall. You've got to go out there and find pieces who fit better than the pieces who are there now.
Lakers are in a tough spot for a number of reasons. Age, LeBron's getting up there. He's getting hurt. They're slim on pieces to deal for trades.
Do you? Yeah. I mean,
and there's
want Rondo if you're young. You don't want Rondo.
No.
He is where he should be, which is with a veteran team that's trying
looking
to win
for a title. Yeah, and not to mention they have dealt away a lot of their future draft picks.
They have nothing.
They've got nothing. So the long-term future of the Los Angeles Lakers probably doesn't look that good.
No, and I
in my opinion.
And you don't want Westbrook either if you're a team that's not a contender. No. I think even if you're a contender, you don't want him only because he is what he is. Maybe he could have a Chris Paul-like resurgence as Chris Paul did with the Thunder a couple of years back.
True.
But that's the kind of team that's going to take a flyer on a Westbrook, is a team that's like, hey, if you come here and be our Chris Paul, then maybe you could get your career corrected and go play for a championship. But right now, people don't want him, and it's not because he's like any kind of head case or anything. He's not.
Right. There's just no value.
He's just not a great fit. He's making a lot of money. He's getting up there in years, and you're exactly right. Your opinion is right, is that this is a team that they're going all in right now, but they keep bringing in LeBron's friends, and LeBron's friends are no spring chickens anymore.
No, hello.
Right? Yeah, I mean, and he's had a great year, but
yeah, he has.
But how are you going to look in May?
Sure.
You're 37 years old in May, having gone through a full season. That's going to be tough when you don't have a lot of pieces and parts around you.
They're probably going to look like you in your men's basketball league that you're going to have tonight.
I would hope they wouldn't be quite that inept, but we do have men's basketball tonight, and I do play with the older guys, and I'm much like Melo, in that that I can get really hot, and it'll last for about 15 minutes, and then the rest of the time they wish they didn't have me on the team because I keep shooting.
And then they give you the IV.
Then they give me the IV, yeah. And then, the ice and the Aleve and all that. Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, Sam, this has been awesome. We're doing Cavs on the Break on the road here on location here at Whitey's in Richfield. Great talking Cavs with you. A lot of good stuff. We went through a lot of fun Cavs memories, current stuff with the team. And, of course, what's going to happen down the road here with the trades that could or could not happen. Guys, keep your eyes and ears to once the deadline comes here in February. A lot of good talks, man. How about we order some food now?
I think that's a great idea. By the way, it's nice to have you back in the area. You're probably one of the few people who would leave Tampa, Florida, to come back to Ohio in November. But it's nice to have you back just a second.
It's good to be here, and I'm here early for some early Thanksgiving festivities with the family, and driving in here, driving past the old Coliseum where it was on 303 there.
Mark Price has said about that Coliseum real quick, by the way. He said, it's like a part of my life didn't even exist.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm wearing my Coliseum T-shirt right now. I figured we're going to be over here. I might as well dress for the occasion.
Yeah.
Courtesy of one of the Cleveland T-shirt companies, because there's just so many of them. But, man, I have a Coliseum stadium seat.
No kidding.
Did I ever tell you that?
No, that's something else.
Yeah, I have a side note before we wrap this up. I'm not a big memorabilia guy. I've got a couple framed jerseys that people have given me as gifts that I've framed from athletes. But the one thing I do collect that I do have that I love and I cherish next to my daughter and my dog, my wife too, obviously. She won't be listening to this, don't worry.
Yeah, mine doesn't.
I have a stadium seat from every single Cleveland venue.
Wow.
With the exception of League Park.
No kidding.
So I have a Blue Gund Arena seat. I have a Municipal Stadium seat. I've got a Jacobs Field seat, Brown Stadium seat, Cleveland Arena seat.
Cleveland Arena.
Yeah, I'm dropping knowledge
Where
right
is
here on.
That was like.
But that was before the Coliseum. That's I think where the American Red Cross is right now in downtown Cleveland. I think they built it right on that site.
Okay.
If you guys could only see Sam's face as I'm telling him this, he's never known this about me.
No,
your eyes
I'm just
you are
wondering
intrigued.
how you got them. Do they know that you have them?
Who? The Cavs?
The people who own these seats.
Oh no, I've got them from the people.
You got
that
them
own
legally?
Some illegal. Well, actually, the funny story, legally, yes. My brother, Scott Sabol,
that makes it
here.
way less exciting that you got them legally.
Well, this is a funny, intriguing story. When they were tearing down Municipal Stadium, my brother was working somewhere in Cleveland and drove by it and got out to take a picture and saw a pile of seats next to the dumpster. And the security guy came up to him. My brother thought he was going to get in trouble. And my brother's like, can I have these? He's like, yeah, take them. We're just going to throw them away. Wow. So we picked two Municipal Stadium seats. One was maroon and one was the mustard yellow color. And I asked for one of them, and he gave me one of them. So I have one, and he has the other. So when I tracked down a Richfield Coliseum seat, which in the stadium seat world is very hard to find, I knew a guy who had two. Actually, excuse me, he had three. And they were one of the floor seats. And it was like a bench seat that were, they all folded up together, but there were three of them. Just like you saw when people tore down Municipal Stadium when the Browns left. They're throwing like a whole row.
Yeah.
This was a row of three. And so I'm like, Scott, you want one? You got me a Municipal Stadium seat, 20-some years ago. I know this guy. I'm like, all right. So I drove, met him, got him, drove to my brother's, and the agreement was that we would cut him, and he would take one, I'd take the other. And then the third seat, which, if you think about a row, wouldn't have an armrest.
Right.
So now the only thing you have is the what you sit on and the backing. So now we just have one in pieces. with no armrest.
Yeah.
So
Well, you should sit in those when we do the podcast.
you know what? I should have brought them.
Yeah.
I should have brought them. So my brother has those somewhere in his house. But yeah, whenever I think of the Coliseum, I've got a chair, and it is probably one of the most comfortable seats because it's cushioned.
Yeah, it was front row seat, right?
It was one of the floor seats.
Yeah.
How about that? Pretty cool. I'll show you pictures when we get off the pod here. They won't see it, but I think I've tweeted them out in the past. But all right, time for food. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. You can get in touch with us on Twitter. You can tweet at me, John_Sabol. Sam, you're at Amico Hoops.
That's correct.
They can read you at hoopswire.com.
Yep.
You can tweet us at the show, at the Cavs on the Break on Twitter. And be on the lookout for my podcast, Sabol Brothers on the Baseline, with Mike Fratello coming up here next week. As we do every episode here on Cavs on the Break, we're going to send it to our boy Mike Breen. Sam, you ready?
I'm ready.
Mike Breen, take us out.
Congratulations, Cleveland. Your decades-long wait is finally over. The Cavaliers are NBA champions.